Hi there, my name is Mr. Pete. I am a fourth grade teacher, and today I'm going to continue the Lemonade Crime Chapter 2. If you have come to my page, you'll know that I've read several books that are in the playlists. If you click the playlist button, you can see them all, including the first book of this series, The Lemonade War. The Lemonade Crime continues the adventures of Evan and Jesse as they seek out, spoiler alert if you haven't read the first book or chapter 1, as they seek out who stole the money from their Lemonade War. Before we get started with chapter 2, I just want to give a quick thank you to those of you who have come onto my site just to watch a video. Please subscribe. It'll be up here at the end of the videos, either up in this corner or this corner. I don't know which one yet. But please subscribe, click on the bells, leave comments, do all of those things that can help me out. Again, I'm not trying to make money. The goal for this site is just to have like a global book talk with any of the books that I happen to be reading. So I really appreciate any comments that are left, any suggestions for books, and of course, any ideas that you might have for all of you teachers out there who might be watching this. Now, as we head into chapter 2, we know that chapter 1 was a lot of that exposition where we learn about all the main characters, the main players of the game. We learn that Evan and Jesse, again, are the main characters. That was a Jesse chapter. We know that Scott Spencer, of course, is at play, and we know that he got an Xbox, and we're trying to figure out where the money came from. We're also working on Plot Mountain. To my class, there should have been 8 plot points in that last chapter, and as we head into this chapter, we are going to, again, count the plot points, and in this chapter I counted 9. Now, if you have a different number, that's okay. We will share them in class, and you can decide whether you're right or I'm right, or maybe we both are. Okay? Chapter 2, Revenge. This is an Evan chapter. Revenge. Highlight vocabulary word: the act of causing pain or harm to another person because that person has injured you in some way. So you can already make a prediction here. Who is looking for revenge, and from whom are they looking for revenge from? Evan crushed the note in his hand. Suddenly, he didn't feel like laughing and joking around with his friends. Suddenly, he wanted to punch his fist through the wall. I highlighted this and labeled it as hyperbole, but I think he actually wants to punch a hole through the wall. Here's why. Evan was more certain than ever that Scott had stolen money from him. It had happened just last week, right in the middle of that heat wave, right in the middle of the Lemonade War with Jesse. They'd all been at Jack's house, all the guys, Paul and Ryan and Kevin and Malik and Scott, were playing pool basketball. So make sure that we highlight Jack's house. Make sure we highlight Paul, Ryan, Kevin, Malik, Scott. We know Paul and Ryan. I don't think we've talked about Kevin in this book yet, so mark him as a character, and Malik as well. And again, this is an anecdote. We're going back to the first book. We're still sort of giving some exposition here, setting up the background for what's going on. Evan had $208 in the pocket of his shorts. $208. It was more money than he'd ever seen in his whole life. He'd left his shorts folded on the bed in Jack's bedroom while they all went swimming. But then Scott got out of the pool to go to the bathroom. And a minute later, he came running out of the house saying he had to go home right away. And when Evan went back in the house to get dressed, the money was gone. All right, so Scott is definitely a suspect, right? But wouldn't Paul, Ryan, Kevin, and Malik also be suspects? If you go back to the Lemonade War, they mentioned that other people had gone into the house. It had been the worst feeling in Evan's entire life. We could probably make a case for hyperbole there, but maybe not. Maybe it was the worst feeling you'd ever have. Once upon a time, about 1,000,000 years ago, Scott and Evan had been friends. So we don't know anything about Scott. This is kind of a wow moment. They used to be friends. About 1,000,000 years ago is hyperbole, by the way. Sort of. Evan used to play at Scott's house a lot, and once in a while Scott would play at Evan's, although Scott said his house was better because there was more stuff to do. One time, Evan even went overnight to Scott's beach house on the Cape. So again, here's a character trait of Scott. All right, he didn't really want to go to Evan's house a lot. They mostly wanted to go to Scott's house because there was more to do, and they have a beach house. The Spencers had plenty of money because Scott's mom was a lawyer at one of the biggest law offices downtown, and his dad ran a financial consulting business out of their home. So highlight financial and consulting. Financial deals with money. Consulting is you're helping other people. So a financial consulting business means your job is to help other people with their money. But things had cooled off since then, way off. The truth was, Scott was kind of a pain to be around. The way he bragged, highlight vocabulary word, the way he cheated at games, even stupid little games like Go Fish or Operation. So bragging means you're talking about all the things you have, and he's cheated. Again, these are all character traits. And again, we're getting these character traits through Evan's perspective. We'll decide throughout the story whether they're true or not. Who cared about winning a game like Go Fish? And the way he kept things locked up, like the snacks at his house, he kept yodels and ring dings locked in a metal file cabinet in his basement. If Evan thought about it, he had to admit that he really couldn't stand the kid. And now he had a reason to hate him. So think about the character traits we learned about Scott there. Again, we don't really know a whole lot about him. We know he's rich. We know he kind of brags about things. We know he's kind of a jerk to them, and we know his parents are rich, but we know mom's a lawyer, dad's a financial consultant, but we don't really know like his story. And we know that Evan doesn't like him. What does that say about Evan? Morning work, Evan, said Mrs. Overton, tapping the worksheet on his desk as she walked by. So it's important we put setting up at the top to connect it back to the last chapter. So we're in the classroom now. So our setting is there, and he's thinking back on this, and his teacher notices he's sort of daydreaming. Evan turned back to his own desk and studied the daily double math problem in front of him. All the other kids in the class were working on the same problem, and Evan could tell that some of them had already finished. Normally, this would have made him tense, highlight vocab word, made him, oh no, I gotta hurry up. But this morning, he couldn't even concentrate enough on the problem to get that uh-oh feeling inside of him. I'd get an Xbox, the new one. That's what Scott had said last week, just before the money disappeared from Evan's shorts. They were trying to figure out how much money they would make from a lemonade stand and what they would buy if they got rich. Suddenly rich. And now he had an Xbox. Scott Spencer had a 2020, and Evan was sure he'd bought it with the money he'd stolen from Evan's pocket. Evan felt like lifting his head and howling. Shh, 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 shh. A sound like a rattlesnake ready to strike shimmied through the classroom. All right, lots of things to highlight there. Highlight the whole sentence. Simile, comparing, well, we'll get to that in a second. Shh, 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 shh. Onomatopoeia, we'll get to that in a second. And then shimmied, vocabulary word. Shimmied, it's like shuffling. So you picture the way a snake would move. We don't know what's making that sound yet, but know that that's onomatopoeia, a simile comparing whatever it is she's shaking to a snake, and then the vocabulary word. Evan looked up. Mrs. Overton was shaking the big African Shakira. So underline Shakira. That's what's being compared to the snake for your simile. She used to get everyone's attention. The beads draped around the hollowed out gourd made a rustling, rattling sound. Highlight rustling, vocabulary word. It's kind of that, like a rustling, like when Snoopy was kind of rustling through the pumpkin patch. Okay, paper collector, said Mrs. Overton, please gather the daily doubles and put them on my desk. Every week, the students in 4O were assigned a job. Some of the jobs were serious, like paper collector and equipment manager and attendance monitor, and some of them were silly, like chicken dresser, the person who chose an outfit for the rubber chicken that sat on Mrs. Overton's desk, and goofy face maker, the person who made a face that all the kids in 4O had to copy at the end of the day on Friday. Everyone else, come over to the rug for morning meeting. Evan looked back down at the blank math problem in front of him. The only thing he'd written on his page was his name. He handed the paper to Sarah Monroe, character, then walked over to the rug in the corner and dropped onto the floor, his back up against the bookcase. Evan, sit up please, said Mrs. Overton, smiling at him. No slouching. Highlight vocabulary word. Slouching is when you're kind of hunched over. In the circle, Evan crossed his legs and sat up properly. First, they went around the circle, and every person had to say hello to the person on the right and the person on the left, but in a different way. When it was his turn, Evan said konnichiwa to Adam, who was sitting next to him. Evan liked saying the Japanese word. It made him feel like he was kicking a ball around inside his mouth, similarly comparing to saying konnichiwa to kicking a ball in his mouth. Jesse used sign language to say hello to Megan. Scott Spencer said, "What's up?"
What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Yo. What's up? What's
to Ryan, which made everyone in the class laugh. Everyone except Evan. Then Mrs. Overton turned to a fresh page on the morning board. A wild goose had landed on the playground yesterday morning, and that was the topic for discussion. Mrs. Overton wanted to know what the kids knew about geese in particular, and migrating birds in general. So they took turns until every single one of them had written a fact on the easel. Evan wrote, "Some birds fly for days." He was going to add, "when they migrate," but he was pretty sure he'd mess up the spelling of the word migrate, so he left off that part. You can highlight the word migrate. Migrate means go to a different place. Birds, of course, migrate in the winter. I'm probably really confused right now because our weather's super nice. When they'd finished talking about geese and migration, Mrs. Overton capped the magic markers and said, "Would anyone like to share something with the class before we go back to our desks?" About half the kids raised their hand, but no one's hand went up faster than Scott Spencer's. "Scott," said Mrs. Overton. Evan slumped back against the bookcase. He did not want to hear what Scott had to share with the class. "I got an Xbox 2020, Scott said, looking around at all the other kids. Immediately, the class exploded with noise. 27 fourth graders started talking at once. Mrs. Overton had to shake her Shakira for nearly 10 seconds to get the kids to quiet down. "Holy rubber chickens," said Mrs. Overton. The kids in 4-0 laughed. "I can tell you're all interested in Scott's new game box. Let's have 3 questions for Scott about his share, and then we'll move on to the next person." Mrs. Overton called on Alyssa first, new character. "What's so great about a 2020, she asked. "Are you kidding?" said Paul. "You put on these goggles, and the TV goes totally 3D. "Paul, remember to raise your hand if you want to talk," said Mrs. Overton. Scott nodded his head. "Yeah, it's like you're really in the jungle," said Scott, "or in a car chase, or wherever the game goes. And the controls are the gloves you wear. It's how you move your fingers like this." Scott held out his hands and showed how he moved them in different ways to make things happen in the game. Ryan shook his head as if he couldn't quite believe it. Mrs. Overton looked at all the hands that were still raised. "Question number 2, Jack?" "What games do you have?" asked Jack. All the boys and even some of the girls had turned their bodies so that the whole circle was facing Scott. "So far, I've got Defenders, Road Rage, and Crisis. And then I've got a whole bunch that are in Japanese, and I have no idea what they are." The class started to whisper and talk again until Mrs. Overton called for the last question before moving on. "Jesse?" Evan sat up a little, wondering what his little sister would ask. The first few days of school, Jesse had hardly said a word. Now everyone in the class turned to hear what she had to say. "How much did it cost?" she asked. Evan smiled. Leave it to Jesse to ask the one thing that everyone wanted to know, but didn't dare ask. "Jesse, that's not an appropriate question," said Mrs. Overton. Jesse's forehead wrinkled up. "Why not?" "We don't talk about money in class," said Mrs. Overton. "We do in math," said Jesse. "All the time." "That's different," said Mrs. Overton. "What I mean is, we don't ask each other how much things cost. It isn't polite." "Okay, let's move on. Evan, do you have something you'd like to share with the class?" Evan had raised his hand, and now he dropped it. "Since Jesse's question didn't count, can I ask the 3rd question?" Mrs. Overton paused for a minute. Evan could tell that she wanted to move on to a different topic, but she also wanted to follow the rules of morning meeting. "Okay," she said. "That seems fair." Evan turned to Scott and looked him right in the face. That feeling came over him, the same one he'd had when he'd read Jesse's note. It was like a giant steamroller. Highlight that. Simile, comparing a steamroller to that feeling he got when he saw that note. Evan almost never got angry or jealous, but now he wanted to reach across the room and grab Scott and shake something out of him. Hyperbole. Who bought it? He asked. You or your parents? Scott jutted his chin out like he did when he was challenging Evan on the basketball court. I did. All my own money. The class erupted again, and Mrs. Overton didn't bother with the Shakira. She just held her hands up and said, 4-0! When they quieted down, she said, Scott, it's very impressive that you saved your money for something you wanted to buy. Now let's move on. But Evan couldn't move on. He couldn't listen to Sally tell the class about the trip she'd taken to her grandparents' house, or even to Paul talk about the nest of snakes he'd found in his backyard. He couldn't hear anything or see anything. That feeling was all over him, through him, inside him, that feeling of wanting to shake something out of Scott. And now he knew what it was he wanted. Evan wanted revenge. So, Evan clearly believes that Scott Spencer took the money. Do you believe that Scott Spencer took the money? And if he did, what is Evan and Jesse going to do about it? All right, I'm going to leave it there. Go ahead and make predictions with what you think there. You can write it right in your book. If you own the book at home and you're not part of my class, please make sure you use a sticky note so you don't take the library off or whoever you got the book from. So tomorrow we will hop right on into Eyewitness. So we still don't know what happened. Will we find out what happened in chapter 3? It's a good question. It is a Jesse chapter. Again, I want to say thank you to all of the readers. And please make sure that you leave notes below, leave comments, answer questions, ask me questions. And of course, if you have any ideas for a book, just let me know. Please subscribe to the channel, click on those bells so that you can get notified of when someone responds, so you can get notified when new videos pop up, and you can help me out by just keeping this going. Remember, the more conversation we have about any book is a better conversation. All right? So have an amazing day. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you all on the next page. Peace.